and Assalamualaikum everyone. This is Zara Qureshi, team lead at MedAngle, and I'd like to welcome you all to another episode of It's a Match specialty series by MedAngle, a deep dive into different US specialties. Over to you, Ilsa.
Hi everyone, thank you Zara. My name is Ilsa and I'm currently manager here at MedAngle. And for today's episode, we have two very lovely speakers with us. And before we dive into our conversations for today, I'd love if our speakers introduce themselves and also if they mention one little thing that's unique to their journey. So we can start with Dr. Fatma and then Dr. Bushra can follow.
Hi, everyone. My name is Fatma. I graduated from Aga Khan University in 2021. And something that was pretty unique to my journey was I had to sit out an entire match cycle due to visa issues. So it was kind of like an unexpected gap year in my application, even though everything else was ready.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Fatma. Dr. Bushra, over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Bushra Admani. I graduated from Dow Medical College in 2020 and I matched into pediatrics at University of Oklahoma. I think one thing that was unique about my application was I made it a point to showcase most of my personality, even those points that were outside of medicine into my application. And I think those really, the program that I matched with, it really resonated with the program director there. So I think personally, the match is really, it's called the match for a reason. It is about finding the perfect fit for the program as well as for you. So yeah, I think that was my take on the journey.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fatma and Dr. Bushra. So, as Dr. Bushra already mentioned, the specialty we'll be diving into today is pediatrics. And I'd like to start off by asking the both of you, why peds? What made you decide to go into it?
Yeah,
So, Dr. Fatma, over to you.
So I didn't actually think I would like peds. I actually thought I was going to hate it. I talked a lot about this in my personal statement, and an entire line in my personal statement is I love working with children when they're happy and when they're well, but I didn't think I would enjoy seeing them constantly sick and ill, right? And that was something that I didn't think I could emotionally deal with. Like, I loved working with children. Like, throughout high school, throughout med school, I used to volunteer with children, but I didn't think that would translate into me liking pediatrics. But I think once I came into my pediatrics rotation, it was like a done deal. Like, I don't think there was one particular reason. Like, I don't have a particular story or like a specific experience. I think a lot of it is just a gut feeling. Once you go through medical school, you sort of get an idea or some sort of intuition of what you like and what you don't. And for me, it was peds. And I just, like, since then, it's just been like a done deal. Like, I can't really see myself doing anything else.
That's so wonderful, Dr. Bushra.
Yeah, I think now that when you ask me why peds, I'd say why not? It's the best field out there. But I knew, I think for sure when I did my house job. So when I was graduating med school, I was interested in everything and I liked everything. So I knew I was going to do a house job for sure because it's a very different experience working as a doctor and as a medical student, and when that's and experiencing a field. So I think, yeah, it's like Fatma mentioned, I loved going to work every single day when I was on my peds rotation. So it's just so fun. And now that I look back, I think, when you make a decision and then you look back and you think all of these things in my life were pointing towards that. So I grew up in a very big family. I have 5 siblings and 15 cousins. So I grew up around a lot of children, and it's just the age ranges are from 21 years to 5-year-olds, and I enjoy every single, spending time with every single one of them. So I guess it was a part of my personality, but I think generally, if you're somebody who's, deciding to do pediatrics, I think it's a very rewarding field. It's fun. It's like if you see the Glockenflecken videos, they're true. It's all rainbows and unicorns, and there's no. I don't think there's any other job where you get to go to work wearing a costume and it's completely normal. But also there's a side of pediatrics that, it's not like there's a misconception that, it's all happy and we're all soft. I think when you're in pediatrics, you have to show up and at the worst times of a parent's life, and maybe, you know, you're dealing with somebody who's had a gunshot wound, or like you have to talk to a mother whose only child would not survive. So I think the appropriate term is fiercely compassionate. We're very compassionate, but also we're not soft. So I think that is a very unique thing about pediatrics that I really love. And just, I think one of my mentors taught me this, that when you're working with children, you really have the opportunity to shape generations. And I think that holds very true in pediatrics. So I guess all of this summed up.
Yeah, like I completely agree with that. I think there's this huge conception in like the Desi community, especially, that pediatrics is like easy. I think emotionally it's much more taxing than adult medicine, because when you're thinking of the lifespan of a human, you're thinking of them from the age that they're a baby, like, you know, they're just born, to the age where they grow old, and they're like, naturally their body starts to sort of, you know, deteriorate, they become frail, and then they pass away, right? And when you're dealing with people who are on the extreme spectrums of this, particularly with children, it's so emotionally jarring and taxing. I think you really need to be strong, not just for yourself, but for your patient and for their entire nuclear family. And I think that takes a lot of effort. Like, I think emotionally, you really need to be like really, really in a good place to be able to do it. I often talk to like other counterparts who are like an IM and neuro, and, you know, they often say they actually found pediatrics much more difficult because of this side of it. So, you know, I think peds isn't given enough credit, particularly pediatricians. They do great work. And I'm just starting off my journey. I'm not a pediatrician yet. Fingers crossed one day, but, you know, like, I'm hopeful that I can be a part of that too in the future.
I think that's really wonderful, you know, to know that you can shape generations and you can, you know, you can be fiercely compassionate and you can show up for your patients in such a way that you might not be able to in all specialties, right? And, you know, on that note, I wanted to ask, I know that applying as an IMG is difficult, and IMG from Pakistan, everyone has their own challenges. But what does the competitiveness look like when applying to a specialty like pediatrics?
So historically, pediatrics isn't really a competitive specialty. If your goal is to match into peds, unless you have a really terrible application, you will match. I think the competitiveness is more if you're aiming for like a really mid to high tier program, particularly like T50, T80 programs, like the ones that are sort of desirable towards for MDs and DOs, like the local graduates, right? So like I mentioned a little bit, like not a lot of people go into peds. I think this was mentioned at some point, but the reason that a lot of local graduates prefer not to go into it is because the compensation is pretty poor for like the effort that you put into training. Like the training is just as long and arduous. Actually, they actually calculated the hours. Pediatrics training is actually longer. Like the hours are more, the work intensity is more, but the payoff is a lot less, right? So a lot of local graduates really don't go for it as much. The only ones who do are the ones who actually are fiercely compassionate and really, really want to do it. And so it creates this effect where the competitive specialty, like the competitive programs, are full of local graduates, because of the ones who do want to do it, because the PDs know that they really want to do it. And then obviously you have a lot of other programs that are completely saturated by just IMGs. And so, you know, it depends on what you're aiming for. If your goal is, I want to go to this really big academic university program, then that is still competitive. If your goal is, I just want to match, then you will match. Like, I think that's my take on it.
So I wanted to ask a bit more about, you know, how many offered positions are there for pediatrics in terms of, especially this year's 2024 match? Dr. Bushra, if you could like expand a bit more on that. How many positions are offered, and, you know, how many are usually filled, and do a lot of them go into SOAP or scramble later on? How does that kind of work for in terms of peds?
Yeah, I think based on, I don't remember the exact numbers right now, but based on the research that we did, I think there were 3,000 positions. But you need to understand that you know, every program is not, like, you're not going to apply to 3,000 programs. That's the thing. So when you make your program list, and when I was applying, my mentor from last year who just matched, who's now a PGY1, told me that when I was applying, I could only find 60 programs. And you know, when you talk to your IM friends, ones, they're applying to like 100 and 150, or I had a friend who applied to 200 programs. So, and then you're applying to only like 50 or 80 programs, and then you really feel the peer pressure. Because, you know, at the end of the day, there, as an international medical graduate, we apply very broadly. And so I feel like, but I was doing my program research. And I did a very thorough program research, because I think you can also be very, you know, financially responsible when applying if you do your program research very properly. So I went to every program's website and researched what their required credentials were. Because I had a year of graduation gap for 4 years, so would they take that? So just, I think 2 hours before the application deadline, I just fell into the peer pressure and impulsively applied to 20 more programs, which I think was useless because I didn't get an interview from any of them. But like, so yeah, I think the point that I'm trying to make is that, you know, do a very thorough program research. And even if your number is smaller than your IM friends, that's fine if you have done a very, you know, a very thorough program research.
Just
Yeah,
add on a little bit to that about SOAP, right? So that's a huge talking point, I think, for this particular cycle. It was a huge jump, like similar to what happened with emergency medicine last cycle. This was very predictable. Peds this year went into SOAP, and there was a drastic increase in unfilled spots. So there's around 251 programs in Peds overall. And from those 251, logically, IMGs are only meeting the criteria for maybe 125 at most, right? After taking into account the months required of US clinical experience, year of graduation cutoff, like all of those little nitty-gritty details, right? And then there's some programs that historically say we take IMGs, but they really don't, right? They never interview them, they never take them. And so logically, there were like maybe 125 at most that you can technically apply to and still expect an interview from. And even that's an overestimation. This year, I think the categorical number of positions increased from last year. They were around 3,000 something. Last year, they were like 2,800 something, right? And then this year, there were actually 251 unfilled spots that went into SOAP compared to 79 from last year. So there was a huge increase in the number of SOAP applications. And I think the main reason for this is the recent changes in the PEDS curriculum. Unfortunately, one of them is obviously poor compensation. People are getting sick of it. I don't think it applies to IMGs as much. So as an IMG, if you're going to the US and you're working as a doctor, you're still making money. Like, you don't have to worry about it. Obviously, it's less than your IM counterparts or general surgery or other specialties, but you're still going to be making quite a lot of money. You're still going to be in a really high tax bracket. Like, you're still going to be making more than 200,000 a year. And for us, I think that's not an issue. I think it's more of an issue for local graduates because they have student loans they need to pay off, right? So as an IMG, you don't need to be worried about the fact that you're not going to get paid money. You won't be paying your bills. You will make a crap ton of money anywhere, okay? I think the reason it went into, so one of them was compensation. One of the other really big reasons was there's a PEDS hospitalist fellowship now. So this is terrible, very controversial. I don't like this. A lot of applicants, a lot of current pediatricians don't like this. It's a very controversial decision by ACGME. But before, when you did a 3-year PEDS residency, you would graduate as a fully certified pediatrician who could practice inpatient and outpatient. So basically, a general pediatrician in Pakistan, what they do, they go to wards, but they also go to clinics, right? But there's been changes now so that there's a focus more on outpatient in the ACGME curriculum during residency. And what they've done is that they've added an extra 2-year hospitalist fellowship. And that effectively means that if you want to do what a general pediatrician used to be able to do and currently does in other countries like Pakistan, instead of 3 years, that's 3 years residency plus 2 years ski fellowship, and you're getting paid pretty much the same for 2 additional years of training. And I think that really put off a lot of people because it's sort of pushing people to either stay in general pediatrics because that's where the money is, or do an extra 2-year fellowship to make the same amount as a general pediatrician, or to go into other fellowships and that pay less than, again, general pediatrics. So therefore, there was a lot of fewer applicants. I think a lot of programs that don't interview IMGs ended up going into SOAP. And I think that's actually good for people who are applying next cycle, because those programs that historically who never took IMGs are now going to be interviewing IMGs. So that's kind of like the whole like dilemma with peds and why there were so many SOAP spots this year.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's really good about the fact that peds is not so saturated, I think that because it's it's not as competitive as IM. Again, I don't think competitive is the right word, but I think saturated. So you really stand out if you have like for example, not to overhype scores, but if you have a 250 in IM, I think almost everybody in IM as an IMG now has a 250. But if you have a 250 in peds, or like this number of research, it really helps you stand out. So you could like aim for a higher reach program in peds. And I don't think you should hold yourself back as like if that you can't go to a higher reach program as an IMG. I've seen so many people go to amazing programs. So I think you should definitely reach for those as well.
100%. I was surprised by some of the interviews I got this season, because I thought, wow, they've never taken IMGs. Like they take maybe 1 or 2 a year. And even the program that I applied for, historically, there hasn't been any pediatrics, like the program I matched at, sorry. Like there hasn't historically been any Pakistani or Desi like IMG who matched there, like to my knowledge, in like the last 5-6 years. So I didn't really think that they would even interview me. So I think if your application is really tailored to pediatrics, that really helps you stand out. And again, if you have really good scores, if you have a very well-rounded application with like a little bit of everything, then that really makes you stand out to PDs.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Fatma and Dr. Bushra, for the stats regarding peds and the programs and everything. So one thing that you both mentioned towards the end was an application standing out. So I believe it's time that we touch a little bit more over that. And this would, I believe, not be valid just for applicants who are applying for the 2025 math cycle, but also for medical students who are currently in their medical school, maybe 4th year, final year, and they're very passionate about going into peds. So what would you recommend? How do they shape their CV in such a way that when they actually sit for the match, their CV is already tailored to what programs would actually ask? So, Dr. Fatma, do you want to go first?
So like I mentioned, there's various parts of your application. There's your score, there's like the academic side of it. Those are your scores, your university transcripts, your MSPE. Those are your, like your nitty gritty, like objective measures, right? So those will tell the program about your academic acumen, but it doesn't really tell the program about you, right? So it sort of is just like, oh, okay, this person's smart, but like, how are they as a doctor? Because there's a lot of research that's proven that scores are really not a good measure of a good doctor, because half of medicine is just communication. And so they really want to assess that part, like who you are as a person. And I think that is so downplayed as in the IMG community. I think whenever people talk about, oh, like what are programs looking for, they're focusing on stats, months of USCE, STEP scores, research publications. Like that's one part of your application. A huge other chunk is your personal statement and your ERAS app, particularly the experiences in that. And my interviews, every single one focused more on those than it did on the other things. And it's kind of like a cutoff. Like if you have a good score, that makes you stand out, but it won't make a program interview you. You can have a good score and nothing else on your CV, and they think, okay, but this other IMG has an equivalent score, so why not interview them, because they've done this too, right? So having a well-rounded personal statement, having a well-rounded CV with a good number of volunteer experiences, work experiences, some sort of experience in research, having some sort of hobby that's unique or anything extra or something like unique or niche that you bring to the table that other applicants don't, really makes you stand out. And for each person, that's very different. Like it doesn't have to necessarily, your volunteer experiences, ideally try to do something with children, volunteer in an orphanage, do food drives, work in like child protection, but it doesn't have to be pediatrics related. I think there's a huge focus in volunteer specifically because ACGME has an entire ambulatory module where they focus on community pediatrics and advocacy. And so advocacy being like the key term, I think is so important in pediatrics, both in the community and in the clinic itself, because you're advocating for patients, you're advocating in the community for like children's rights. And every program I interviewed that really focused on specifically that part of my application. And I really think that is the reason they interviewed me. They kept bringing it up. Even the programs where I had 2 interviews with 2 different people in the same program, both of them would bring it up. So I think that is one thing specific to peds, the advocacy, it's super relevant. Like where in surgery, they might focus more on academic things. In pediatrics, they're really going to focus on like community involvement. And I mean, that was my experience at least. And obviously nothing makes or breaks your app, right? So having a really good score isn't going to guarantee an interview. Having a lot of volunteer experience isn't going to guarantee an interview. You have to work with what you have and, you know, try your best to have a little bit of everything. If you didn't score well in your steps, that's not going to kill your career. If you didn't get to do electives, that's fine. I didn't get to do electives because of COVID. And I ended up doing like an externship after graduation. And weirdly enough, I did one in IM and one in peds. And I had only one US LOR. And I had one of my LORs out of 4 from an IM physician. And I still got a great number of interviews. I still matched. Nothing's going to make or break your app. You just have to try your best to fit in everything. Your scores are going to tell this person is objectively a good candidate, like not just your scores, your transcripts, your MSPE, everything combined. They do look at both, they correlate them. But your like CV and your personal statement is going to make them think, oh, you know, I really want to talk to this person. And that's what's going to get them to interview you.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything Fatma said, and like it's all 100% relevant. And just to build upon that, like I mentioned in the start, the match is really about finding the perfect fit for you, and also what the perfect fit would be for a program. So when you're building your application, I think you really have to answer 2 questions, and those are, what are you interested in? Because I think as medical students we don't realize this, and even like when you come to the US, you're like, it's a very different healthcare system and one you're not exposed to. These were some things that I realized when I was applying, that there's so many non-traditional pathways that you can take as well. Like, the obvious ones are the academic pathway if you want to go do a fellowship or you want to go do outpatient pediatrics. And then there's academic medicine if you want to do like teaching or research. But there's also, if you're interested, if your experience in Pakistan has shaped you to be very compassionate about underserved areas or social determinants of health or public health, there are programs out there that have dedicated tracks for global health. If you're interested about border health, there was a program I interviewed at that had that specific rotation, and then you can make these you can make careers out of these as well. And then there are also there are a lot of programs with specific tracks for community outreach and advocacy too, like Fatma mentioned. It's a huge aspect in pediatrics. So I think I know it's very hard before applying because don't know these programs. So I think start researching the programs earlier and find out what your niche is, what you're compassionate about. Because at the end of the day, who you are as a person and what your values are will reflect in the program you end up matching at. Because, just to give an example, I think I was personally very invested in social skills and professional development and personal growth. And I think the program that I matched at, it was one of the core values at that program. So it clicks, and that's what the match truly is about. So I think all of this, and just like Fatma mentioned, the volunteer experience, because I think my personal experience, I had 2 experiences that were brought up a lot. One was my experience as a first response instructor, because I was very passionate about raising medical education. I think that just awareness goes beyond the confines of a hospital. What we're doing, practicing medicine actually goes beyond the confines of a hospital. So I would, given the lack of, a structured first response program in Pakistan, we would go to schools and teach that to schools, and we were trying to make that a part of their curriculum. Like we said, shaping generations. So that really was an aspect that was brought up in a lot of my interviews and even the outreach and advocacy. And I did not do that specifically to pediatrics, just regular medical awareness about thalassemia, diabetes, and all of that. But those skills really shape you because the experiences you get to talking to people and understanding those perspectives really helps you understand and see a patient beyond like just a prescription. What factors go into like what are their family conditions, what are their financial conditions, and all of that really shapes your practice as a physician. So I think, yeah, I'm like very big on volunteer experiences because they shape who you are as a person.
Yeah, like, and work too. Like that gap year that I had, I didn't know what to do in it because it was unexpected. I thought I was going to apply for the 2023 cycle, and I found out in September, oh, I can't apply. And so, there's that thing, obviously, as an IMG, where you have to sort of fill in your gaps. If you're an old graduate, particularly more than 1 year out of grad, they do sort of expect you to have some sort of like filler, like what did you do in that 1 year? And I ended up doing med ed, so I was working sort of like as a teaching associate / demonstrator. And that was such a new experience for me. I think I never saw myself doing that, and that's also one thing that a lot of programs really bought up. I think having some sort of professional work experience after graduation really shows programs that you have a work ethic, that you'll be able to like meet your requirements, and it shows them that this person has a plan, like that they're adaptable, that they were able to do something in that gap year. And so I think again, everyone's journey is so unique to them, so no one can tell you exactly what to put in it. But like I said, nothing makes or breaks it. It's like a culmination of little things. And like Bushra touched upon as well, I think there's a huge aspect of tailoring your application towards programs that you're interested in, right? So I knew from the get-go I wanted to do my residency in a standalone children's hospital affiliated with a university, right? So I wanted to be at an academic university program. I wanted it to have its own standalone hospital as opposed to just like a floor, a couple number of floors in the main hospital. And that's what I was aiming for. And a huge part of what I wanted to do as a pediatrician, like I'm so undecided. I don't know if I want to do general peds. I don't know if I want to do a fellowship, but I did know that I did want advocacy and community outreach to be a part of what I do. And that's why, like, when I was going to all of these open houses and UConn came up like as one of the houses, I was like, oh my God, this is so perfect. It's in a location I want to be in because it's close to my partner. It ticks all of the other boxes and it has such a great advocacy pathway. And, for one of the more rich states, the area is so poor and underserved. There's so many immigrants. This is something I would love doing, right? So I think going to those open houses, researching your programs early, asking seniors and mentors who are in those programs what they like about those programs, it really sort of helps guide what you would want. Like if I hadn't attended that open house, I may not have known that I would have liked this program. It wouldn't have clicked the same way, right? And after that open house, I sent a letter of interest and I was like, I love your program. Like, I love it. Like, I would love to be a resident there. And, I think that really you need to know what you want before you go into the match cycle. It's difficult to ask, obviously, at this stage. Like it's very reflective. I think you really need to sit down and think about what your goals are. But if you're able to determine that early on, you can really tailor your application. You're going to a university program, try to have some sort of research, have a well-rounded application. You're going to a community program, maybe don't emphasize research too much, because if they don't have the facilities for it, they're going to think, okay, but like, why is this person applying to my program if they're so into research? If you're aiming for a T10, T20 program, think about, and you have a gap after graduation that while you're studying, try to do a postdoc. Like it really helps. I think people who did postdocs this year matched like at great places. A lot of them matched in-house at the programs they did their postdocs at. For peds, a lot of people who did postdocs matched at T20 programs. So I think it really helps knowing what you want early on and tailoring your application towards the type of program and the setting that you want to be in.
I think it really does put a really nice light on everything. And so I wanted to go touch a bit upon, I think both of you mentioned a bit about the personal statement, right? And I mean, that's something that everyone applying for the match has to write, has to submit. But I wanted to ask, in terms of peds, how do you make your personal statement something that stands out, something that really reflects who you are and your passion for pediatrics? Dr. Bushra?
I think the personal statement was one of the hardest things about the whole match cycle because it has to be so like it has to be so you, and and there was a point, and I'm like, really, who am I? So you have that imposter syndrome, and like you have to like do a lot of introspective thinking and finding out who you are, and try to present the most honest and genuine perspective of you, also while again trying to be the perfect fit. So I think one really good advice that I got while writing my personal statement was that try thinking of it like you're talking to a friend, and try introducing yourself to that person, because they're the person that you're most honest, and like you're not fearful of judgment. So just and I wrote that. I actually regurgitated all of my thoughts like that, and I guess that was like the starting that was like the starting structure of how my personal statement ended up looking like. Generally, you should answer 4 questions. I think firstly, who you are as a person, and what your personality is. Secondly, why peds, obviously, and then what do you bring to the table? What's unique about you? What do you bring to the program, and what are you looking for in a program? Because that's what a program wants to know. How do I build onto this person and get them where they want to be? Yeah, and I think a really well-written personal statement, really, it's like you have to be memorable, right? So I think my personal statement started with a quote, because I'm very into motivational speaking and all of that. So it started with a quote that said, "What will your legacy be?" And I was just talking to one of my interviewers about something that completely different, about like we were talking about a patient experience that I had. And he mentioned that, I think that's going to be your legacy. And I was honestly very positively surprised that he remembered. So yeah, I think try to make your personal statement, and it was also reflective of who I am as a person. So try to make your personal statement as memorable as it can be.
I think that's something
Yeah,
that
I
even
think
I'm going to remember for a very long time. Sorry, Dr. Fatma, go ahead. No,
personal
I was
statement,
good.
it's the hardest part of the application. I had a really funny story actually. Like I have a partner who matched. All of my friends matched last cycle. And so I had a lot of people to sort of like try to help guide me. And I was still that person that I had nothing written. And September 23rd, like before I was about to send out my application, I had a panic attack, and in a coffee-induced binge, I just wrote whatever came to my mind. And I was like, I'm submitting it. And I think that was so true to me because I didn't think about it too much or second guess it. I think that's what Bushra was saying as well. Like it comes from the heart, like it's so genuine. I feel like if I had tried to sit down and write something very like technically, it wouldn't have been that reflective. And now I read it again and I'm like, wow, I didn't know I could be that deep, you know? I think the personal statement, Bushra covered it perfectly. Why do you want to do this specialty? They don't want to know why you want to do medicine. You're already a doctor. Why do you want to do peds? What are you looking for in a program? What do you bring to the table? And why this particular program? Why are you applying to this program specifically, right? Those are the 4 questions you need to answer. And it's not supposed to be some sort of like long, drawn out, formal essay. Like use informal language, but don't make it like, sorry, that's my cat. Don't make it too informal, but don't make it too formal. There's a fine art of also balancing the personal statement so that it's not too cocky or overconfident, and it's not a regurgitation of what you've put in your CV. You're not answering why you're a good applicant, your qualities, they're better answered by like other people assessing you, right? So if you say something like, I am super hardworking and I've always demonstrated a willingness to learn, that's something that is better assessed by a preceptor. That's better assessed in LORs. Instead, say something like, I want to learn, I want to be a better physician, right? So there's a very fine line, I think, in language when it comes to navigating the personal statement. You want to show your passion without coming across as fake. You want to be able to demonstrate just enough good qualities, but in a non-cocky, non-overconfident way, right? And I think that's really hard to navigate. Definitely have someone read it, because sometimes we feel like, okay, this language is fine, but it might not be fine. Particularly, I think as Desi people who might not be native language or like native English speakers, it's kind of hard to like navigate that tone sometimes. So definitely have people review it, but take what they say with a grain of salt. Obviously, at the end of the day, you know yourself best. And there might be things that other people say, oh my God, cut this out, but you really want to keep it. That happened with me. Like my partner was like, this first paragraph is completely nonsensical, doesn't make sense, so you shouldn't have it, but I kept it in. And one of the places I interviewed actually bought that part of my personal statement up. So I think, you know, be genuine to yourself and make sure your personal statement complements your CV. Together, they should sort of like give the program director and whoever's assessing your application just enough information that it piques their interest. You know, they're like, oh, that's interesting, but it doesn't tell them everything. They should read your personal statement with your CV and think, oh my God, I want to know more about this person. Like they should know enough to know you're good, but also not enough to like, you know, just from the get-go be like, oh, isn't it like this person has already put everything that I wanted to know. They should want to be able to talk to you. They should read it and think, I really want to have a conversation with this person. And so, you know, put enough, but not too much. Don't be overconfident, but, you know, try to throw in subtle hints of good qualities.
I think it's about finding the right balance. Like, you know, it
Yeah.
shouldn't be a complete reflection of your CV, but it should like complement it in such a way that they couldn't go hand in hand, that your CV looks incomplete without it, and vice versa as well.
Absolutely, exactly.
And always give examples, like, you know, share stories. My personal statement had a lot of stories from my house job, because I think, again, it really shaped me to be the person that I am today. So just everything that you mentioned, if you're talking about, you know, compassion, tell them a story, and that's how they're going to remember that you actually are compassionate.
And be honest. Like, don't try to like, if you don't have one particular reason, what, or like a particular incident, you don't need to make one up. Just be genuine, be honest. Like, you know, answer that question for yourself first. Why do you want to do this specialty? Is there a particular incident in medical school, in your house job, after you graduated, in your childhood that made you want to do this? You know, what cemented that decision for you? And again, it doesn't have to be a reason. For me, like I had one entire paragraph where I literally mentioned that there was no single feature. It was a culmination of a billion different things that made me want to go into pediatrics, right? And try to elaborate on it. Try to reflect. Try to write down qualities that you want to have as a doctor and try to highlight those as to why you wanted to do peds as well. Like, I think again, and start early. Like, don't do what I did. Don't write it at the last minute. Like, sometimes it works out, but it could have gone terribly as well.
I think that's a really true testament to, you know, your passion for pediatrics. And if that reflects in your personal statement, maybe through anecdotes, through like Dr. Bushra said, you know, she started off with, you know, what are the legacy, what legacy do you want to leave? I think that's a really, really nice way. And I think that's something that, I mean, for the last 5 minutes hearing you guys speak, it's something that I'm also going to take back with me. And hopefully when I'm also applying and also thinking about my personal statement. But over to you, Ilsa.
All right, so now that we've covered almost everything that a match applicant would want to know about building their CV, writing their personal statements, research, and volunteer experiences and whatnot, now I believe it's time that we discuss your personal experiences, Dr. Fatma and Dr. Bushra, about the match cycle that you just went through. From selecting programs to taking interviews to networking, you mentioned open houses. So we'd be very interested in knowing that. How was that for you personally? So Dr. Bushra, you can go first.
Yeah, I think the open houses actually played a vital role for me, especially in deciding, you know, what program I would be most interested in applying to, because again, like we said, it's a very new healthcare system, and you don't know what, like in Pakistan, you know, okay, these are the X, Y, and Z programs in hospitals. So I think so most open houses start in June, and that's when you need to start looking out for them. One great resource is Future Peds Res. It's a pediatrics interest group run by American medical students, but it's also interestingly, it's also open to like IMGs as well. So you can even apply and be part of that leadership, especially like Fatma and I, we both had a gap year. And if you're looking for something to do during that gap year, that's a great leadership role you might want to, and that's also, again, a very good opportunity for you to network as well. So I think they're active on Twitter, Instagram. They also have a YouTube channel, so you could look into that. And so they have these regional webinars, and that's how they function basically. That for example, and it's very similar to the ERAS region. So for example, you may have a geographical preference, and you want to start with the Mid-Atlantic. So you see all those programs, and basically all the programs are there to they're trying to sell themselves to you too, as like you're selling yourself to them. So just and again, that's a great way to find out what the program wants, because every program has their own niche, and a lot of that also resonates with what the values of the program director, the program leadership has. If there's a program director that's personally very interested in community outreach, that the residents will have a lot of opportunities like that. So just attending all of those webinars, there are a lot. I'm going to tell you, I think I overdid them and I had Zoom fatigue before the interviews even started. So I think but it's a great way to find out what you want in a program. I guess that's generally about the open houses. The interview season, I think one thing I will mention, that the interviews start late. So do not have a panic attack. I remember Fatma and I had this conversation because I am friends would be having interviews and rejections. And because it's very stressful. The first, you've put 2 years or like all of your life into an application and it's submitted and you just have to sit and wait. And it's like very stressful. But the interviews, they have a 2-week lag. This is determined by the Association of Pediatric Program Directors. So that they're going to be silent for two weeks, and it does not mean that you're not going to get matched or you're not going to get interviews. Just wait, sit tight, and find something again outside of medicine or like a hobby, or try to keep working. I was taking my step 3, so it really kept me sane. So I think that's a very important aspect of like waiting for interviews. Generally, the interviews, I think, were very conversational. One advice that I would say, and this is actually something that most program directors say, that we can teach the medicine aspect. We can teach you if you're not, you're lacking in knowledge. But we can really change your personality. We can build character. So that's what they want to look for. That's the kind of candidate that they're looking for. Are you willing to take feedback? Are you clinically curious? Are you passionate about your work? Do you have the right communication skills? And that is all that was discussed in the interviews.
I agree with everything she said. I think Future Pediatrics was brilliant. I loved it. And weirdly enough, I think it actually helps me in my interviews, because obviously going into it, your first interview, you're going to be nervous, and having like talked to residents in those open houses beforehand a little bit, it sort of like alleviated some of that tension. I think it made it easier to speak up in the actual open houses for like the actual residency interview. So the interview day is super long. It's really tiring, and a huge part of that is like meeting residents, and that's actually, weirdly enough, part of your evaluation, because one of the things that they assess on a scale is how you get along with co-applicants and other residents in the program. So they are assessing you. They're looking at how you're interacting with their faculty, with their residents. So I think definitely attend those, especially if they're in a specific geographical region that you want to be in. Like, I knew I wanted to be in this area. I didn't even apply to programs on the opposite coast, but I definitely went to their open houses irrespective, because I was like, I'm not applying here. So, if I mess up, it's fine. Like in the open houses, I'm just going to practice, definitely practice your interviews with a mentor. I compiled a list of like interview questions. I'm like very weirdly like type A about this stuff, but like I have this entire document of like every interview question that my partner, me, every applicant I know has been asked, as well as like these online resources I found. So I'm willing to like share that with anyone who asks. Like, feel free to reach out whenever. So practice your interviews. They're not just looking at your answers, they're looking at how you answer, like the way you talk, your language, your communication skills, how you are dressed. Like, a lot of things are assessed. So if you mess up an answer, that's not the end of the day. Like, it's not gonna like mess up your chances of matching. Another really important thing about interviews that I didn't really know beforehand was, yes, it's very conversational, but almost every single program I interviewed at had 1 or 2 situational questions that are objective questions that sort of measure ethical, situational, behavioral scenarios. So an example of this would be, tell me about a time where you had a conflict with a colleague and how did you handle it? Or tell me about a time where you disagreed with your attending or preceptor and how did you handle it? Tell me about a time, you saw your colleague doing something unethical or illegal. What did you do about it? So they will, and these questions are questions they will ask every applicant, and they will assess that on an objective scale. And then there's a subjective part of the interview, which is conversational. They're just getting to know you as a person. They're elaborating on your CV. Super conversational. Peds is great because the people are great. Everyone's super friendly. That's something like I talked to people who applied in IM and they were so stressed. They were like, everyone's so mean. And like Peds, it was so nice. Like everyone was so sweet. So honestly, like best specialty, like I'm biased, but whatever. Another really great resource, Twitter. Connecting with fellow applicants. Like Bushra actually like messaged me I think on Twitter initially. We were like, oh my God, we're like both DCIMGs are applying, like let's panic together. Apna's great for mock interviews. Then there's also, I don't know if you, every year they make this mega spreadsheet on Reddit. It's called the mega thread. And so it has I don't even know how to describe it, honestly. Just link it. Like I'll send you a link, just link it in the video. It's great. It basically like tells you which programs have started sending out interviews, the stats of the applicants who've gotten interviews. You can sort of keep tally and see, oh, you sort of like feel like you're part of like a little team, because you don't feel as alone, I think, when you're going through it. But be mindful, don't go too deep into it or else you're going to stress yourself out. I think besides that, the miscellaneous parts of like the application process, the interviews are as much as they are for you as they are for the programs, because you're also assessing if you're a good fit for that program. There were programs I interviewed at. I actually signaled a program that I thought I would love, right? And I got an interview and I was like over the moon. I was like, oh my God, this is such a great program. I would die to match here. And then during the residency interview, I was the only person of color. I was the only IMG. Every other applicant who was interviewing with me was a Mudfoot, MD, PhDs. And I felt so out of my element. I had the major imposter syndrome, literally felt like I could not see myself in that program. So great on paper, great reputation, great ranking, like top program, but I really could not feel comfortable. I couldn't speak during the interview, like during the open house part of it. I couldn't I just couldn't see myself in it. So, keep that in mind as well. I feel like when you're making the rank order list, like you need to also assess, is this program the right fit for me? Not just when you're applying, but also after your interview is over. There's a lot of open houses in person that people do after the residency interview is done. Those are optional. I think 3 programs I interviewed at had them. I didn't go to any of them because I was too lazy, but like obviously if you have the ability to, you should go. And then there's like other small things, a lot of conversation about connections, if you have them, can help. But again, they're not going to make or break your application. None of the interviews I got were from connections because I didn't really have a lot of alumni or people I knew in the area I wanted to go to. So, connections aren't going to destroy your application if you don't have them. Signals, very, very important. You have 5 in pediatrics, use them judiciously. If you really are aiming for a program that is like high tier and it's maybe a little out of your league, reserve 1 or 2 for that, but use most of your signals very judiciously. Make sure you fit the criteria for that program. And look at the stats, see how many IMGs there are, see how many people of color there are. IMGs aren't necessarily us. Okay, there's US IMGs. They're basically US citizens who went to the Caribbean for med school, and they have 2 years of clinical experience because their rotations are in the US, even though they graduate from the Caribbean. So, just because they have a good IMG percentage doesn't mean that that's representative of the type of IMG you are. So definitely go to their class profiles, see how the residents look. Are there people from Pakistan? Are there people from India? Are there people who are brown? Because that's very important and you don't think of that initially. But I feel like when you do have people like that in the program, you feel a lot more comfortable. Letters of interest, super important. I did not signal UConn and I regretted it later because I didn't really think I would want to come here initially. And then after I sent out my signals and apps, I was like, oh no, I really like this, because that's when I attended the open house. And so I sent a letter of interest, and they ended up interviewing me like a week after I sent that. So they're definitely very, very useful. Geo preference, again, I think it's super important. Only one interview that I received was outside my geographical preference. All of them were within that. So definitely, if you know you want to be in a specific location, use a geo preference. And rank order list, be very careful. I think as Pakistanis, there's a huge rat race. You're chasing prestige. You want to go to top programs, right? Like I said, I was so excited when I interviewed at that one program, and then I was like, oh my God, I would hate my life here, you know? So it's not all about prestige. It's about how are you going to find happiness there? You know, try to find a program that'll make you happy and where you will be happiest, because where you're happy, you're going to perform better. And at the end of the day, yes, there's top programs, there's high tier programs, there's low tier programs, but at the end of the day, you're still going to graduate as a pediatrician. Your base salary is going to be the same as anyone who's graduated from any other program. And depending on maybe if you're deciding to do a really competitive fellowship, which by the way doesn't exist in peds, because peds, every single fellowship goes unmatched every year, including cardio, including neonatology. So, you know, if your goal is I want to go into like, let's say Harvard for like a cardio fellowship, then yes, you'll have to put in more effort, do a little more research. But at the end of the day, it's like anything's possible. The hard part is getting into the residency. Once you have that, you can figure out everything else as it goes, right? That's all I'm going to say about this because I feel like we're
I think that really covers a lot of what.
One very important thing, I think, because so PEDS has all the interviews that are virtual, and that's to maintain equity. That's that's the case. But if you're in Pakistan and you're gonna plan to come to the US, I think so there are programs that offer second looks, in-person second looks, and I attended a couple of them, and I think they really influenced my decision on my rank order list. So if if you're gonna plan, you could plan your trip in a way that you might say during the interview season, because they happen after in January and February after the interview seasons are over. And that's one thing that I think really shaped my journey. And there was another so there's this group called it's section of pediatric trainees by the American Academy of Pediatrics. I think they were also a very good resource for me. They have specific sessions of personal statement and applying for IMGs. Again, I think that was also a very important resource. And like Fatma mentioned, like I also did not have a lot of connections, but I think the open house is a really good time for you to network. So the chief residents that attend those open houses are actually active recruiters. And you could like get in touch with them, email them, and ask for advice on how to make your application more tailored to their program. And that could be a way for you to get noticed. So that's a great resource as well.
I'm so sorry. I'm just going to reiterate one thing, because again, there's a lot of conversation about peds as a backup specialty. You shouldn't be doing pediatrics unless you genuinely love working with children. I think that's a hill I will die on. You know, it's very different, pediatrics in Pakistan and the US. If you have the opportunity, which obviously not everyone has, it's a privilege in itself to be able to apply for the match because of the costs associated with it. If you have the ability to go to the US and maybe look at the landscape of pediatrics in the US before making the decision to do it, I think personally, that's very important, because it's very different in Pakistan and the US. In Pakistan, most parents bring their children when they're sick. In the US, you have well-child visits, and it's more focused on prevention, you know, screening them for things like autism, child abuse, screening them, you know, their mental health. There's a very different landscape of medical practice in general. Like the record keeping is very different, you know, paper versus EMRs. You have a very different scope when it comes to social work, you know, like over there, CPS is a proper organization. It's a huge part of your training. It's actually one of the core modules that you have in ACGME. But in Pakistan, obviously it's very disjointed. There's not really any formal CPS that you can reach out to. So I think definitely before making the decision to do it, ask yourself, do I want to do pediatrics? Is it something I will enjoy and find joy in? Because if you don't enjoy it or find joy in it, over time, it's very easy to become burnout, and it's very easy to become resentful, especially because, again, it doesn't pay as well as other counterparts. And secondly, you know, if you enjoy a specialty in one country, that doesn't necessarily mean you will enjoy it in a different country. A lot of people love IM in Pakistan because it's like 30-year-olds with dengue and malaria, but in the US, it's geriatrics. Basically, everyone's old, you know. So I think definitely if you have the ability to try to figure out what the landscape is of pediatrics in the US. If you can't come yourself, ask people who are there, and do it if you love it. If you don't like it, then don't push yourself into it just for the sake of matching.
Yeah.
That's such a nice note to end on, Dr. Fatma. And Dr. Bushra, would you like to say anything before we wrap up today's episode? One thing you'd like to say that you think is very important, something that you'd like to mention.
Yeah, I think find your niche. I personally think, what you do outside of medicine is as important as what you do to be a better doctor, because I think your interests and hobbies outside of medicine make you a better physician. So, just stay true to that, to who you are. And it could be anything. Like if you're, you like literature and you love storytelling, that makes you a better physician when you're talking to patients and you can understand their stories. Or if it's somebody like you guys who are very passionate about revolutionizing medical education, that's your niche. So that's what you bring to the table, and that's your unique element. And it could be anything. Like I think I've talked to so many people. Some have amazing food blogs, some have like they're interested in sports. Everything is important. And just don't, the match is a very draining journey, but don't lose yourself in the process. And we made it. You guys will make it too. So just stay put and stay tight.
On that wonderful note, I'd like to thank both of you for your time today and your wisdom and your passion as well for this, specific episode and for pediatrics. And I know for sure that you guys are going to go places and do really, really amazing things. So we will hopefully have more episodes following soon after this in our It's a Match specialty series. To stay updated with us, subscribe to our YouTube and follow us on our socials on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Thank you.